Can you all hear me? Great, excellent. So we're going to get started. We're very excited. So Congressman Kennedy, Executive Director Hessler Radelet, Return Peace Corps volunteers, and entire members of the Peace Corps, the BC community, we're so excited to have you. We're really thrilled to welcome you to BC to help celebrate your 55th anniversary. We think that's an incredible accomplishment. My name is Joe DuPont. I am the Associate Vice President for Student Affairs, Career Services at BC. And again, we are really, really thrilled that we can serve as hosts for this event. I think it's very fitting that we're having a service like this at Boston College. To date, since the Peace Corps' inception, there's been 776 Boston College alumni who have served in the Peace Corps. So we consistently rank among the top schools that we shouldn't really be surprised given our emphasis on service and men and women for others, and to see evidence of that both in the people who have shown up today and what our volunteers are doing out there and the talk we're going to hear. We're just extremely grateful and excited to do that. And just so you know, for any students in the audience, the Peace Corps has a very strong presence on campus. They're here for lots of events. There'll be lots more, and we hope that this is something, as you're thinking of service and life beyond BC, that you would consider as well. So we're off to a good start. We expect another banner year of recruitment and are looking forward to that with the Peace Corps. All right, so believe it or not, I know that you're not here to hear me. So I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Congressman Joe Kennedy. And I will just read from his bio to make sure that I get it correct. I think it's fitting that he's kicking it off today, given that his great uncle established the Peace Corps by executive order 55 years ago. So, Joe Kennedy III is proud to serve as the 4th District of Massachusetts in Congress. He's currently in his 2nd term. He represents a diverse district that spans from the suburbs of Boston to the more industrial towns of Massachusetts' South Coast. Whether at home in the Commonwealth or down in Washington, Joe has become a powerful voice for social justice, championing issues like employment, non-discrimination, pay equity, and comprehensive immigration reform. Prior to being elected to Congress, Joe served as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as an ADA, Assistant District Attorney, in both Middlesex County and the Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office. Before that, he served as a member of the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, where he designed and implemented an economic development plan, which is incredible. Born and raised in Massachusetts, Joe is fluent in Spanish, holds a bachelor's degree in management science and engineering from Stanford, and a JD from Harvard Law. He lives with his wife, Lauren, a health policy expert, their daughter, Eleanor, and their dog, Banjo, in Brookline, Massachusetts. So without further ado, Congressman Kennedy.
Hey everybody, working?
Yes.
So, just so I have some idea, how many of you are students? Welcome back from spring break. How's midterms going? Yeah, exactly right. How many RPCVs in the audience? Thank you guys, thank you very, very much for your service. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here, thrilled to see the interest in Peace Corps. I will give an awful lot of that credit to the interest in Peace Corps and our amazing director, Terry, who you're going to hear from momentarily. She has, for those of you social media buffs, she has one of the best Twitter streams on the internet, I will tell you. She puts on more miles than anybody I've ever met, traveling all over the world. But it's really cool. I mean, when I'm in committee hearings, I'm bored. I get to check out the stream of where she's gone, what she's up to, and what Peace Corps volunteers are doing. And you get these amazing pictures of young folks literally in every corner of the globe that are out there finding a way to change the world. And I have to say, it's a pretty inspiring thing when you're in the midst of a committee hearing, some of which are scintillating, some of which are not necessarily quite as scintillating as others. So I urge you all to follow her on Twitter. That's the plug of the day, first plug anyway. So I am thrilled to be here with all of you. I'm grateful that you would be willing to make the time to learn a little bit more about the Peace Corps and to hear a little bit of what it's about. For those of you RPCVs in the crowd, I'm sure you always get asked, as I do, so what was your experience? As if you could somehow distill 2.5 years of a incredible, impactful, meaningful 2 years of your life into a a minute-long elevator speech. So I ended up, when I came back, just said, oh, it was great. And moved on, because I didn't know what else to say, and nobody else would really listen to all that. So the best way I can try to describe my service to you and what it was like is through a little story that happened to me when I was in the Dominican Republic. So I'd been there for about a year. The first 3 months, you go through a training program, and they try to get you some cultural training, some language training, some ideas to what you're going to go do, and then after that, you get sit down and work on some project. So I've been there for about a year, maybe a little less. And I was stationed about 4 hours or so outside of San Domingo, just south of a place called Puerto Plata, which is a tourist destination in the North Coast. I had gone back in, I was on my way into the Peace Corps office to meet up with a couple of other volunteers on a project that I was working on. And I stopped by and I saw my host family in San Domingo, on the outskirts of the city. Saw them for about an hour, jumped back on a bus that is called a Guagua, which is essentially a minivan meant for 12 with about 25 people. And I was in the second to last row. I had a backpack on my lap. I heard this tap on my shoulder. And I turned around and said, "Oh, look at this man." He looks at me and says, "What with us?" See? So he looked at me like I was crazy, as if this could possibly never blend into anything. Okay, sure enough. And he said, "You want to tell me a story?" He lived on the outskirts of San Domingo decades before. He was a young boy. And the community didn't have any access to clean water. Peace Corps volunteers showed up. And we, with the community, put in a series of water pipes to bring clean water to their town. Never asked my name. Never offered it. Or asked where I was from. Thanked me for the work that other gentleman had done all of those years before, because he never had a chance to say thank you. A couple of stops later, bus stopped off. He got off and went off, and I've never seen him since. That is what Peace Corps service, I think, is all about. About an individual that, yes, is willing to go off and find a way to serve their country for a couple of years, but the impact that you leave behind is something that you will never fully understand or appreciate, because just like your friends when you come back home who asked you how the last 2 years of your life were, and expect that somehow you can distill that into a sentence or two. Your host community there can't totally distill your service to them, and you can't try to actually explain what's happened to you over this extraordinarily transformative experience that you've had. I would not be where I am today without my Peace Corps experience. I draw on it every single day in my current job. And not just the Spanish, which is helpful from time to time, but the idea of truly trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and trying to understand the challenges that they face, the opportunities that legislation and that the government has to try to address those concerns, but really understanding and recognizing that their views are just as legitimate as yours. Their experiences are just as legitimate as your own. Trying to find those commonalities that unite us, rather than trying to exploit those divisions. And that is, I think, really what Peace Corps is all about, and what this organization has been all about, why it's also been so successful at Boston College with nearly 800 volunteers over the course of the program's history here, over 8,000 volunteers from Boston. And it is because of the work that you do, but the stories that you carry on, the service, the impact of that service that sticks with you, that I think is the reason why so many people continue to be drawn to it. But I'm thrilled that all of you are interested in exploring veteran service on your own. I will tell you, and I'm sorry, Carrie, I did not love every second of it, but I would not trade that experience, those 27 months for anything. Those of you that are interested in it, I urge you to consider it as well. So with that, I have the honor of basically being Carrie's warm-up act today. And as I said before, an extraordinary director, an extraordinary public servant. My family has a long history with the Peace Corps. My family's history with the Peace Corps is matched by Carrie's history with the Peace Corps. So 4-generation Peace Corps family, if I remember correctly. Carrie herself ended up decided to to serve, went off to Western Samoa, I believe was a teacher, and has since dedicated, her family obviously has dedicated generations of their life, and certainly so many years of her own service, to trying to make sure that the Peace Corps continues to live up to the best ideals of our country, and the ideals on which it was founded. As I indicated, she travels the world. She does an incredible job of highlighting the contribution that Peace Corps volunteers make to host countries, to exporting the American values that we all hold dear, and that are, in fact, the best export we ever could have. So, Carrie, thrilled that you're here. Thank you for all that you do, and please give her our warm applause.
I'm actually not going to stand here, but I have a few quotes to read, and I'm going to introduce a volunteer. We're going to Skype in, so I'm going to have to go back there. But first of all, I want to say, you're a hard act to follow. So remind me not to have me warming me up like really glad to be here. I really commend all the students Friday afternoon after St. Patrick's Day in Boston. Amazing to hear. Congressman Joe, my dear friend, really, and terrific advocate for social justice, incredible, passionate champion for the Peace Corps you just heard. Your story is the story of so many, I have to say. And I do travel all over the world, and I also get thanked for the work that others do all the time. But your story was really beautiful. I want to tell you when I first heard about Joe Kennedy. I took my family to Puerto Plata 10 years ago. It was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And we were staying in a local hotel, and we decided we wanted to go take a walk in a national park because we really love wilderness. So I read about a place called 27 Temples, 27 waterfalls. And so I went over to this place, it's not far from Puerto Plata. And it was an amazing, absolutely extraordinarily beautiful national park. It had a series of 27 waterfalls with cliffs that you could climb up and deep pools that you could swim in. And it was so incredibly well organized. It had all these interpretive boards, and you could read in English and Spanish. It presented the ecosystem. It talked about why it was important to preserve the land. It talked about how this project was a community development project designed to earn income for the local community so they wouldn't have to cut down the forest. It was, I have to tell you, the most, oops, I'm not on. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Now you're really, is that any different? Oh, no, there we go. Did I really need it, honestly? But anyway, okay. Do I have to start over? So, an extraordinarily beautiful and well-organized national park, and it had the safety equipment that I had never seen anywhere in the developing world. You could go with a guide up these waterfalls. There are a total of 27, and I never made it past, I think, like the 9. Most people only get as far as the 7. But you had helmets, you had life jackets, you had a guide who took you there, and you literally climb up the waterfalls. It's very cool. I highly recommend it. So I was commenting to my guide, who was about maybe 18 years old, about how I had spent a lot of time in many developing countries. At the time I was working at Johnstone Incorporated, a Boston-based organization. Joel Ramstein, our founder and president, is there, right here, Joel. Hires a lot of return volunteers, by the way. I had traveled with JSI all over the world, and I had never seen a national park outside the United States that was so well organized. And they said, well, an American helped us do this. You're an American, right? I said, yeah. And they said, well, then you probably know him. His name is Joe Kennedy. And I said, well, actually, as a matter of fact, I think I do know his family, maybe at least, not in person, but. And they said, yeah, he's a Peace Corps volunteer. And the guy, you had left, it was, it was a couple of years previous, but the guy pulled his wallet out and opened it and took out a photo that had clearly been through a lot. I think it had been wet many times. But it was a photo of you, Joe. And he said, this is Joe. He's like my father. Which I found very amusing, because Joe was probably 5 years older than me. Anyway, so that was the first time I ever heard about this particular Joe Kennedy. And now I have to say that I could not do my job as Director of Peace Corps without the support of this Joe Kennedy. So we're very grateful. Let's everyone give him a hand. out to support our agency. We have the highest budget ever in the history of our agency right now. It's because of his help and help of many others. Happy to be at BC. You heard the stats from the other Joe. And so I don't have to repeat them. I told him I was happy he was telling me, because then that part of my brain that I was going to have to remember the stats could now be populated with something else. BC, I think, I wasn't around, I was very young at the time, but I believe that Boston College actually had a part in the founding of the Peace Corps. As you know, your great uncle, John F. Kennedy, was the creator of the Peace Corps, and his other great uncle, Sergeant Schreiber, was his first director of the Peace Corps. Now, Sarge is fond of saying that the reason he was selected to be the first director of the Peace Corps is because President Kennedy was not quite confident the Peace Corps was going to work out, and so he thought it might be easier to fire his brother-in-law than political. And I can tell you that is accurate. But Peace Corps in the early days, when they were doing the conceptualizing, was very much founded on Catholic social tradition, especially as practiced by the Jesuits. And although we are a government agency, we are secular. I know that a lot of the basic concepts around, our people-to-people approach, a real focus on social justice, targeting the poorest of the poor, giving, human beings who work side by side. That's all rooted in Catholic social tradition. And a lot of the Peace Corps planning is done here in Boston, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of the folks from BC were involved in that. Now, Sergeant Schreiber gave the 1964 commencement address at Boston College. So I want to just read to you what he said at commencement, because I just think it rings true today. He says, "The problem of achieving peace amidst the tensions and dangers of a nuclear age occupies the mind of much of the human race. Yet few within it discover a useful way to contribute. In reaffirming the essential community of all ordinary people, regardless of creed or nationality, Peace Corps volunteers belong to that small but growing fraternity who, by their individual efforts, do make a difference." It seems to me that that is a message for the ages. It could be just as applicable now. We're still, concerned about the nuclear age, and it is still the common humanity of ordinary people that make peace. So I just thought I would tell you about that, because it was here at BC in 1964, just a few years after our founding. So let me just tell you about the modern Peace Corps. We have currently 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers serving around the world in about 60 countries. We work in 6 sectors. Education is our largest, followed by health, agriculture, environment, community economic development, and youth development. Our volunteers go at the invitation of a host country, so we do not go on our own volition. We have to wait for an invitation from that country, and then within that country, our volunteers serve in communities where they are requested. Our volunteers are there to live and work among the people. That is core to our principle. It is an immersion experience. Our volunteers live in the same homes as their neighbors. They eat the same food. They live on the same subsistence living. They ride the same buses. They celebrate local holidays. They learn to speak the local language. They become a member of that community. And it is the day-to-day lived presence with their community that gives our volunteers both the credibility to work within that community in an effective way, but also the insights into opportunities for and barriers to development. Now, they go there with a job in mind. They are there as teachers, agricultural extension workers, health workers, youth entrepreneurship coaches. But they do so much more. Just like you heard our congressman talk about. They have tea with the local elders. They get to know the pregnant woman next door. They play soccer with the kids. And in doing that, they begin to understand what it is that is important to that community. What are their priorities? Who are the change agents in their community? What motivates them? And that is what they really understand. understand what their place is. And that takes time. You know, people say to us, why is it a 2-year commitment? And it is a 2-year commitment. And it's because the first year you're just learning, you're absorbing. But it's that second year where you can really make a difference. And through that experience, you not only become a member of that community, but you are transformed yourself. You're a different person than you were when you came. So it's a transformational experience. And I bet that if you ask any of the Return Peace Corps volunteers, and we say Return Peace Corps volunteers, RPCVs, because in our mind, you never quite leave Peace Corps service. Once a Peace Corps volunteer, always a Peace Corps volunteer. I want to share a story. It's my favorite story. It's a story that illustrates some of the principles that you were sharing, Congressman. And this is a story of an encounter I had with the president of Sierra Leone, Ernest Bai Koroma. I was asked by President Obama to represent our nation at his inauguration. It was the second term inauguration. This is about 3 years ago. And so as part of that, I went to the inauguration, and then there was a state dinner at his home. And I was seated at his left hand at the head table. And I had read his bio. I knew that he had grown up in a town called McKinney, which is a nice town, but a pretty little town. And so I just was making small talk, and I said to him, so how does a young man from McKinney grow up to be president of his nation? And he said, you know, there's a Peace Corps volunteer in that story. And I said, really? Tell me about it. He said, yeah, when I was a young man, a boy really, there was a Peace Corps volunteer named Cheryl. And she moved into our community, and she was a teacher in the high school. But after school, she used to open her home every day to anyone from the community who wanted homework help or just wanted to hang out. He said, I used to go there almost every day. And she helped me to do a better job in school and really taught me the importance of studying hard and excelling, you know, in my academic work. But even more important than that, she is the first person I can ever remember talking to me about the importance of serving a cause greater than yourself, about the joy that comes from serving others, about how important it is to actively look for opportunities to spread goodwill. He said, I think of her so frequently and have throughout my whole life. Whenever I'm at a pivotal point or facing a tough decision, I frequently say to myself, what would Sharon do in this situation? And it wasn't what she taught me, but how she would do it. And I said, oh, that is such a beautiful story. Have you ever told her? He said, are you kidding? I was 11. I didn't have the words for it when I was 11. So, honestly, I know what was going through my mind is I will never again see this man. So I said to him, hey, if you ever come to Washington, let me know and I'll hook you up with Sharon. Now, anyone who knows our records, Peace Corps in the early days, knows that that is a very foolish commitment. But I honestly bet I will never see this guy again. It's a safe thing to say. Literally, 1 week to the day, I get a phone call. Hi, it's President Koroma. President Obama has invited me to the White House. I'll be there in 10 days, and I can't wait to meet Sharon. Oh my gosh, I was just horrified. I picked up my phone, and I know how bad our records are. We had no records. I mean, like, seriously, in the early days of Peace Corps, and she was in the early days, he couldn't tell me her last name. He couldn't even tell me what year she was serving. I was like, I will never find this person. So, honestly, in the very early days of Peace Corps, I think they wrote people's names down on index cards or something. Anyway, I called our office with responsibility for keeping track of things like that, and they said, no, we'll never find you, but we'll try. I said, just find me any Sharon. So they called 2 hours later, and they said, actually, we found 2 Sharons who served in Sierra Leone. One served in the 70s, and then one served from 64 to 66, and guess what? She served in McKinney. I said, score, that's great. And they had a phone number for her and everything. So I called her up, and she was in Florida. Her name is Sharon Alvarado. And I explained my dilemma, and she said, oh no, I'm confident that none of my kids ever grew up to be president. And also, I don't recognize that name. And also, I just retired and moved to Florida, so no. Put Sharon in beg of you. I promised him a Sharon. I said, I'll tell you what, you don't have to pretend to be that Sharon. You can represent all Sharons. Or at least all Peace Corps volunteers who are named Sharon.
in Sierra Leone. And so he said, she very reluctantly, I mean, literally, I had to totally stoop to new lows to get her to come. But anyway, she did agree to come. So on the appointed day, actually, let me stop here. I want to say something about Sharon, because Sharon is a remarkable person. She had come back from Peace Corps, and she had spent 40 years teaching in some of the roughest neighborhoods in our country. She taught in the south side of Chicago, in the first high school to have a metal detector. And she saw the kind of promise that she saw in her students in McKinney, in the students of South Chicago. Kids with a lot of potential, a lot of promise, but no opportunity, no hope, no role models for the future. So she devoted herself to lifting up the communities around that high school in south side of Chicago, but she had just retired. So she arrived on the day, and she's carrying a massive photo album that is this big. It's one of those old ones with like gold tassels, and it has little pictures with black corners and black and white photos. You know what I'm talking about, right? Those of you who are over 40, you know. Anyway, so she's clutching it in front of her like a shield. And she's so uncomfortable, because she's a very humble person. She hates the limelight. Anyway, so then he comes in, and he's 6'2", he's wearing an Armani suit, and he's very presidential, and he's followed by this 5-star general who's like dripping with medals, but who's about this tall. And this guy is carrying his briefcase. So President Koroma like strides into my office and spots Sharon, who by this time had planted herself in the farthest away corner of my office, literally. And he spies her, and he crosses my office, and he throws his arms around her, and he says, "Sharon!" And I'm behind her, and her eyes were like this. and the photo album is between her and me. And then she said 2 words that changed everything. He said, "Touré Street." Touré Street. Touré Street was the name of the street where she lived. She was a sheriff. She was a sheriff. And they sat down on my couch, and she opened her photo album, and there were pictures of him as a little boy that he had never seen, because no one in his family had a camera. There were pictures of his grandfather who died 35 years earlier, his best friend, who he hadn't seen for 20 years. It was an extraordinary. He was weeping, she was weeping. Now, I have to say Sharon is very honest, because I am confident that if I had been in her shoes, I would have pretended that I remembered her. But she's like, "I don't remember you. Which one were you?" And she, he pointed to a photo, and she said, "Baba? Baba, it's you? You're the president?" Because no one ever called him Ernest. They called him Baba, which is like a nickname. She didn't recognize him because she didn't know him by his former name. And then she said, "I can't believe you grew up to be president. You're so Baba." And then, once she figured out who he was, she also figured out that it was his mother, who had been her major sort of cultural interpreter and really best friend. It was his mother who had taught her how to cook Sierra Leonean food, and how to shop in the market, and how to wrap her headdress, and how to, just survive in Sierra Leone. It was his mother who had told her which boys she should not go out with because they drink too much. And then those boys you go out with because they go to church. And so she was her dear friend. And so she was able to tell him how important his mother had been. And it was just an unbelievable reunion. The other funny thing she said is, he told her, he went into a lot of detail about all the life lessons that he learned from her. And she said to him, "I can't believe you ever listened to me. I don't remember you ever listening to me." So anyway, then we went down to our, big hall on the first floor of the Peace Corps, and he gave a speech, a fabulous speech. About half of it was about how Sharon had changed his life. And the other half of it was about how Peace Corps volunteers had changed the lives of his people. He talked about how our volunteers, because of their presence in his communities, showed the people of Sierra that the people of the United States cared about them personally, that we were willing to send our most precious asset
our sons and our daughters, our mothers and our fathers, to live and work in very rough conditions, eating food that we all know made our bellies sick, right? Working on their priorities, not ours, celebrating their holidays, speaking some of the languages that are not even written down, showing the people of Sierra Leone that we as people care about them as people. He said that is the greatest gift that this country has ever given our country. And at the end of the day, we got to finish this event. Oh, actually, I forgot to say that at the end of it, she actually jumped up and spoke for 10 minutes about how important his mother was in her life. At the end of the day, we went out to the sort of front sidewalk, and the Secret Service are there, and the big limo is there, and he gave her a giant hug, and he said, "I will never forget this day." And then he got into the limo and drove away, and that was the end of that. The reason I like to tell the story is several things. First of all, the work that we do is hard, and it is long. It takes a long time to build human development. Oftentimes our volunteers say, "I'm not really sure I made an impact because I couldn't see it in the 2 years I was there." But the work that we do is a labor of love that is human development, and human development takes decades to fully realize. And that story shows it. She would never have known the true impact she had had on that one child if it hadn't been for my chance meeting with him. And actually, I'm quite confident that Sharon affected many people, not just the president. And I tell this to return Peace Corps volunteers because I think sometimes it's really hard for us. When we're in the thick of it, Joe talked about how it's not always easy. In fact, it's frequently very difficult. Development is a messy business. But what keeps us going is the confidence that we are making a difference, even if we never see the difference. We are planting a seed for a tree that will shade our members. So I tell that story to return volunteers because I want you to know that you did make a difference. I have hundreds of stories that are told to me, just like that. Not always by presidents, often mostly not by presidents, although there are 12 presidents in Africa today that say that they got to start from a Peace Corps volunteer. And they will tell you everything about that person, things you cannot believe they were doing. But also I hear it from mothers, from nurses, from midwives, from taxi drivers here. When I was driving the airport the other day, yesterday. I was driving the airport in DC yesterday. I had an Ethiopian cab driver. And I told him, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was coming up here, and I told him I worked for the Peace Corps. And he said, "Oh, the Peace Corps. I learned English from a Peace Corps volunteer, and that's why I could come to the United States." He said, "You know what? I drive a cab. But my daughter, she would not be a doctor if not for the Peace Corps." That is the Peace Corps' legacy, in my opinion. They have to speak every day. So I just want you to know, those of you who have already served and those of you who are considering service, that it is a life-changing opportunity. It is a life-changing event or series of events. And you will never fully understand its impact in your life or in others. It is hard. It's hard, so be aware of that. But there is nothing, I think, that gives you pleasure like something that's hard. Nothing easy, nothing beautiful is ever easy. So I want to tell you how dedicated Jillian is. She is Skyping in from Lima, where she has taken a 16-hour bus ride from her site, and she's joining us after taking the GRE. She just took the GRE. So Jillian, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you really clearly.
Okay, this is Carrie. We sort of met digitally a few seconds ago. So tell us what a day in your life in Peru is like.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is really exciting to be back here, speaking at BC, and also getting to talk perhaps to a few RPCVs, Congressman Kennedy, Director Hester Rabbit, who are both RPCVs too. So it's a really great honor, although it has been sort of a long day. So I would say that typically no 2 days are alike. So I don't always have typical days in the life of a Peace Corps volunteer. volunteer in Peru. But typically, as Carrie mentioned, I do have 2 major projects that I'm working on a day-to-day basis. The first being with mothers or families who have children under 3 or a pregnant woman. Working with them basically with the ultimate goal of decreasing malnutrition in children under 3. So Peru has really high levels of malnutrition, and actually the area that I live in has the highest level of malnutrition in the country. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm typically going to these women's houses and I'm like hiking up the mountain. I live in the mountains. So I'm hiking around from house to house, sometimes with a hiking stick, sometimes with some rocks for any guard dogs. And I'm just doing mainly house visits.
Throwing down that.
So I mainly work with these women through house visits. There tends to be a lot of obstacles to them coming and participating in group sessions or in sort of large-scale events. So I typically work with them one-on-one, sometimes in coordination with the health post or a health promoter on my site. So that's something that I'm doing 4 to 5 days every week. And then additionally, also every single week, going to the high school and working with a group of now 18 youth who I am working with to train them to become peer health promoters and to sort of take on a leadership role in their community. So that's my typical day. I always eat lunch with my host family. I live actually with a Peruvian family in the house. So I always, 100% of days, eat lunch with my family unless maybe one of the moms has invited me to lunch. And I also typically always eat dinner with my host family. So I'm sort of in and out of our house, and then in the mornings and afternoons, popping into the health post, popping into the high school, and making my way around to houses in the community.
That's wonderful, Joanne. You mentioned food. You know, one thing you learn if you hang around with any Peace Corps volunteers or return volunteers, there are 3 things we talk about. Food, the bathroom, and bodily functions. So what's your favorite food? Is it cuy?
Yes, so
What
I
else
think
are
actually
curious?
one of my favorite foods would be guinea pig.
That's guinea pig.
Although it definitely a few times I've pitched or
Oh, I think we missed you. Can you say a few things? Can we hear you?
Am I still there?
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
No, I was just saying that it took a few times for me to actually try before we get used to that protein.
I think what she said is it took a little while for her to get used to eating guinea pig, which was a pet. I know that when I went to Peru, well, I think of it as a pet. I had a guinea pig growing up, and I know when I went to Peru, they fed me guinea pig, and I was horrified. But anyway. What else do you eat besides guinea pig?
So I eat a lot of rice and potatoes, and I think every single volunteer in Peru would say that to you. Rice and potatoes, and a lot of soups, mainly rice and potato soup. So I actually live with a host family whose nutrition is on somewhat of a different level than the rest of the communities. So I do eat a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables, sort of more of a variety than other families in my community at times.
That's great. What do you do in your spare time? Do you have spare time?
I would say one of the major things I've taken up when I'm in my community with spare time is crocheting and knitting. Because that's something that almost all women do, so it was good ice-breaking activity, a good bonding activity, and then I kind of got hooked on knitting. So I'm actually finishing my first sweater, which my host mom has been coaching me through.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of like craftsman work, and it's mainly done by women in my setting. A lot of knitting, crocheting, and then weaving on a specific sort of European loom.
So what do you know, as you travel around, what do most Peruvians think about Americans, and what's the one question they ask you most about Americans?
this rainy season. So I get that question probably every single day is, does it rain in the US and how much does it rain and when does it rain? And then in addition to that, I get a lot of people asking if everybody in the US is white, because I'm one of only 2 examples of Americans who they've had living in their community. So typically I try to talk a lot about diversity, about the diversity of the US, and how even among Peace Corps volunteers, not everybody looks like me, and that the US has a much more diverse makeup in terms of how people look, and also in terms of where people are coming from, where all of our families came from at one point or another. And that's a good conversation to have with Peruvians, although it takes a lot of conversation sometimes to get through that not all Americans look like me.
Yeah, very important message.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to tell the audience that we're going to have in one moment an opportunity for you to ask questions, so please think of a question for them, okay? But I'm going to ask one more question, and that is, I've been talking about the fact that Peace Corps, while it is an incredibly wonderful experience and life-changing, it is also hard. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, definitely. I would completely agree with that. I would say that at the very same moment, the Peace Corps is an incredible experience, and it's also almost constantly a very difficult experience, very challenging. I would say probably sorry, I thought I lost you there. I would say probably one of the most challenging things for me has honestly been distance from my family and friends. There is not great communication from my site. I have no internet. My phone service is very spotty, especially when it's raining. So there are a lot of times where I've gotten very frustrated, or my family has gotten very frustrated, because it's taken us maybe 10 calls to connect, or multiple times where we set up a time and it didn't work out. So it can be hard when you just want to pick up the phone and call family or friends and just talk to them instantly, and you can't. So that's definitely a hard thing, but I think the other Peace Corps volunteers that I live and work with here have saved me, and I can pick up the phone and call them, and sometimes they know what I'm talking about and understand, maybe even better than my family or friends back home could. So I think all of us rely a lot on each other, and then rely a lot on our communities. I also would say, when I can't get through to my family in the US, my next step would be to talk to my host mom if I'm going through something. And I have a really great relationship with her, and that's really special and lucky.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, I want to know if there are any questions from the audience.
Might have to have a great soul out there.
How did you,
We have a mic for you, so she can.
I know that you go through kind of a process on getting trained for entering your host country before you go. How prepared did you feel? It was really a huge culture shock when you first got there.
Sure, good question. So actually, almost none of the Peace Corps training that you go through happens before you get to the country, and I think that's the case in all of the countries. So you have about half of a day of what they call staging in Washington, D.C., or possibly in other hubs, depending on which country you're going to. And your whole group meets up there, and then you fly to the country together. And then the first 3 months that I was in Peru with my group, which is Peru 24, we were in Lima. So we had not gone to our sites yet. We did not have sites assigned yet. And we spent the first 3 months living with training host families and being treated every single day. And the training, I honestly thought the training was excellent. I felt extremely prepared technically, language-wise, and culturally when it was the moment to go to my site. And basically almost every day we had technical trainings for myself, training on Peru's health systems, on what are the major health issues that Peru is facing right now, what does malnutrition look like, what are its symptoms, how do you address it, how can we improve it, how do you do a house visit, to gain women's trust in the community, so they'll let you in the front door. That was sort of the technical aspect, and then every single day we had hours of Spanish training. I came in at a high level of Spanish, partially thanks to CE, but still got excellent training. I definitely increased my professional vocab, definitely increased my confidence in using the language. And then apart from that, something they really give throughout training is the cultural aspect. So what are some of the major culture shocks in daily life, and also what are ways that culture affects the way that these volunteers have to in Peru. And interestingly, for this, the next training group that's coming to Peru is coming in April of this year. And it seems like they've revamped their training again. So they're kind of constantly getting feedback from volunteers in terms of ways to improve. And I think some of the suggestions lately have been to incorporate even more cultural awareness and essentially cultural training into this month period. So we'll see. I think with every group they have a somewhat slightly different training experience, but mine was really great.
Another question? Julian, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite tradition in Peru? Your favorite holiday or cultural tradition?
So I would say two. I have one that's a very sort of family tradition, which would be Christmas Eve, which I celebrate with my host family. And in that case, for me, it was very special just because I had a lot of the host family's extended family come, and it was just really, really cool being presented by my host family to the rest of their family, and just kind of see that they were presenting me as sort of as a daughter, a granddaughter, and just getting to just experience their normal holiday with them and their siblings. And also fun because it led to sort of jokes that lasted the whole year about Jillian dancing Peruvian dances. So that was probably my favorite family tradition. And then the other tradition, which became more of a Peace Corps volunteer tradition, is Carnaval, which is celebrated in February, March by a lot of Spanish-speaking countries. But in Peru, it's really out of control in some areas, and the region that I live in is most famous for its Carnival celebrations. And one of the main days of celebration includes sort of a giant heat and water fest that takes place in the whole capital city. So you just have the whole city armed with water guns and balloons filled with paint, and there's paint all over the buildings and painted handprints, and you get drenched in paint. So that was probably my favorite other tradition, and that was a little bit more with Peace Corps volunteers.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. Julian, when did you arrive there in Peru?
So I went in September of 2014, and I got to my study in December of 2014. So I'm going into my last 8 months. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, right there.
Jillian, I read an interview where you were teaching kids in your community about Harry Potter. Can you tell me what that was like and how it's going?
Yes, I think I heard you say, just to hear a little bit about the Harry Potter program.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say one of my lifelong passions is the Harry Potter series. So one of the things I noticed really quickly after getting to site, just sort of meeting all the kids, be it high school or primary school, was that there isn't really a culture of reading. I would say in Peru in general, but just specifically speaking to my site. And that made me a little bit sad to begin with, because reading has been a really important thing to me since I was a kid. So I just sort of started to think about doing a Harry Potter reading club and work a lot on reading comprehension, creative writing, and also actually reading a story from start to finish. Though I was not every single one of the kids in the class that I work with, I don't think has sort of week. So this has been great. I was able to find a teacher to work with, the 5th grade, now 6th grade teacher. And I was able to get her to be more interactive over time as well, which was nice. It wasn't necessarily my goal to just go in and do it by myself. So that's been really great. And the way that their school works, the teacher actually follows the same class from 1st through 6th grade of primary school. So last year, and then we just came back from vacation this month, and I'm just continuing with the same group and the same teacher this year. So it's been one of my favorite things inside. It's a secondary project, so I'm not doing this constantly, but it's been a consistent project throughout the year and a half, and it's also involved just a lot of opportunities for me to be creative and have fun with Harry Potter. For example, we had wands. I sorted them into different houses based on sort of their personal values. Values are very values is something that Peruvians think is very important, developing what your personal values are. And so I looked in the Harry Potter series and sort of saw that each of the school houses had different values that they prioritized above the rest. So I had the students think about whether they valued intelligence or courage, etc. And based on that, had them sort themselves into houses. So we've had a lot of fun with it. I've gotten to use a lot of little Harry Potter props. And it's just been interesting because they've never read anything like this before.
Oh, wow. Are there any questions? One more question.
What's one thing about Peruvian culture that you want to bring back to the United States?
You hear that?
What is one thing about Peruvian culture?
That you want to bring back to the U.S.
Okay. Let me think. Just, I think this is something I've actually struggled with at the beginning, and now I think I've come to see it as a strength of Peruvian culture. There are definitely different ideas about privacy, and Peruvians, in my site, who didn't even know me really well, would ask what felt like at times private questions, or they would also just tell me a lot about themselves, about their life, about struggles they've gone through. And so I think at first this felt a little uncomfortable for me, because it really was people that I didn't know, who were just sharing a lot about themselves and also asking me a lot about myself. But I think ultimately it's indicative of the culture. They're very open. They just want to share everything with you. And for me to come in and be the foreigner in the site and to feel like people were sharing really personal things with me and also cared and wanted to get to know me, that ultimately is really special. So I would say that I think as Americans, I'm speaking for just myself, I think sometimes I'm very private, which is fine, but it is also nice to really be open and share your experiences with other people.
You want to have the last word?
Sure.
We're going to get one more question, Julia.
Sure.
Jillian, thanks so much for doing this. I'm just curious, BC is a big history, I think you heard it before, of so many alums who've gone off to do the Peace Corps. And I was just curious, from your standpoint, what is it in terms of either being here, our culture, your coursework, your extracurriculars that, I guess, made you feel like this is something that you wanted to do?
Sure. I would say in my experience, it definitely, I can trace back to BC a few of reasons why I felt compelled to do the Peace Corps. One of them was the coursework, just the flexibility that I was able to take multiple languages at BC. Definitely a huge motivation for me to do the Peace Corps was just to work on my language skills and to become fluent like a native. And I think part of that was kindled at BC. And the opportunity to study abroad at BC gave me a taste of something that I wanted to repeat when I was still, fresh out of school, I wanted to go live in another culture and be a part of it, whether as a student or as someone working as a professional. But I would say a lot of my coursework in the international studies major, I think just did expose me to a lot more of what was going on in the world than I had been exposed to before. And it just made me a lot more conscious, a lot more questioning, and a lot more curious and wanting to know more detail about how a country works, what its people are like, why a country is the way it is. And I think that was definitely one of the major things that made me look deeper into Peace Corps.
Wonderful. Well, Jillian, you've been a fantastic example and representative of Peace Corps volunteers in the field. So grateful for your
Thank
service,
you.
for your the work that you do in your community.